Good evening, everyone. My name is Carrie Holmes, along with Ron Reichstein. I'm the co-chair of the Beverly Hills Bar Association's Family Law Section. We welcome you this evening to what I'm sure will be a wonderful program, COVID, Custody, and Civil Unrest, the 2020 holiday season. Ron?
So just a couple of announcements. You will receive your MCLE certificate shortly after the program ends. After the program, please take a moment to complete the survey. A survey link will be included with your MCLE certificate. The Family Law section is sponsored by Soberlink, White, Zuckerman, Warsofsky, Luna, and Hunt, and Our Family Wizard. Soberlink's system combines a portable breathalyzer with wireless technology, trusted for use in child custody cases since 2011. We are the only system that combines court admissibility in all 50 states and Canada, facial recognition and tamper detection, real-time results, easy-to-read advanced reporting. Trust the experts in remote alcohol monitoring technology for your custody cases involving alcohol. White, Zuckerman, Warsofsky, Luna, and Hunt provides a wide variety of resources to complete almost any project, large or small. They also provide traditional accounting and tax practice services. We invite you to contact them to discuss your specific accounting needs and learn how they can be of service to you. Our Family Wizard is a secure co-parenting platform that supports divorced or separated parents in managing the daily responsibilities of raising children. Specialized features help co-parents organize routines, share files, track expenses and payments, check in at exchanges, send messages, and more, all while thoroughly documenting their activity. And with that, I'll pass the baton to Amira Hazenbush.
Good evening, I'm Amira Hazenbush. I'm going to be moderating our panel this evening and doing my best to keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A, so please feel free to put in questions there. I'd like to start by introducing our wonderful speakers tonight. We have Shani Braffman-Amon. She is a partner in the Family Law Department at Elkins, Kalt in Los Angeles. She's also an adjunct professor of community property at USC Gould School of Law. Next, we have Commissioner Laura Cohen. She was sworn in January 2019, assigned to family law, originally with a home court, and recently assigned to hear only restraining orders when Judge Riff reopened 3 restraining order departments at Stanley Mosque. She comes to the bench with a range of experience in the community as a clinical law professor, dependency attorney, and director of pro bono and public interest programs. Next, we have Dr. David Epstein. Dr. Epstein is board certified in pediatrics and pediatric critical care medicine. He worked for 16 years in pediatric ICUs, including Mattel Children's Hospital at UCLA and Children's Hospital Los Angeles. He's currently the medical director and co-founder of MVP Pediatric and Urgent Care in Tarzana. And finally, we have Robin Sachs. Robin Sachs is a former prosecutor of over 15 years who specialized in abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence. Robin is also a clinical therapist. She practices criminal defense, victim advocacy, and is often a parenting coach and parenting plan coordinator in the family law realm. Robin brings to this discussion her perspective as a professional working at the intersection of crime, family law, abuse, mental health, and children. And we're going to start with an introduction from Robin about the mental health concerns and issues that COVID brings to us during the holidays.
Thank you, Amira. Welcome, everyone. I'm sure as everyone is sitting here right now, we're all inundated with the new waves of where we are in COVID land. And just as I thought we would all it's old news that COVID is impacting mental health, we're now on the heels of now a new wave, which is bringing about a whole bunch of new mental health ramifications. So while it's not news that COVID is impacting mental health, What has hit the news in this last week is that the amount of anxiety and depression and the numbers now substantiating what the COVID impacts are out there and available for us. At this point, the studies are showing that anxiety has tripled since COVID and depression has quadrupled in numbers since the time of COVID. Such issues as illness, fear of illness, social isolation, disruption of routines, loss of incomes, loss of loved ones are all risk factors when it comes to mental health diagnoses, particularly depression and anxiety. This depression and anxiety is exacerbated by the election that we just had, as well as the impending holidays. We always talk about custody stuff and kind of preparing for dealing with the change and possible emotions in the holidays. And the holidays aren't necessarily great for everyone. And they're even scarier right now, given the fact that there's just so much confusion. And that's why I'm actually speaking first, and we'll have Dr. David Epstein talk after me, who is going to hopefully dispel some of the confusion, because what we need to understand is confusion brings about terror. And terror in people of not knowing what's going on makes people have a fight or flight response, and sometimes makes their thinking brain go away, where it's very hard to make decisions and very, very hard to make good decisions. So having some kind of insight as to what people are feeling and going through is really important for lawyers, for mental health providers, of course, but also for parents understanding their kids. So one of the things that we know and that's happening in the community right now is, in addition to all this kind of depression and anxiety that has been in existence, and we've known kind of that we're coming and is here, is that we're now entering this time where people are experiencing COVID fatigue. And, you know, we've all seen it, and we're dealing with the ramifications of COVID fatigue. People kind of feel, you know, we've done everything we can. It's almost like I look at it kind of like as like my diet idea, like, oh, if I broke my diet on Tuesday, then screw it. I'll eat all the chocolate cake for the next few days and whatever, and then the diet's over. There's a little bit of that's what's happening with COVID, and that some people feel like, oh, well, we can't eliminate COVID, so we might as well we're taking a risk, so we might as well just do everything. And people are losing sight of the different roles that they play in terms of their safety. And while we're hearing from officials and from doctors that we're going back into stricter rules and regulations, we're also seeing people fashion workarounds more than ever. I've seen in college campuses, kids who are required to test. Instead of testing, they're no longer testing because you can't know if you don't test. They're not adding contacts because they don't want to quarantine. So instead of getting the information, they're not getting the information. And so people are finding workarounds that are impacting their safety and other people's safety. So what can we kind of do? One of the things, you know, I always try to see which therapeutic tool that we can use for these kinds of instances. And one of these is to recognize dialectical thinking. And dialectical thinking is kind of the idea that two things can exist at the same time. We can be in a pandemic, and we must exercise safety, and we may need to take some sort of risk. And really getting people, and this is stuff that we should be doing with our clients anyway, is recognizing the world is not black or white or right or wrong or yes or no, but we live in a world of gray, and making informed decisions and activating our clients, our opposing counsels, our kids, our families' thinking mind right now. And because there is so much confusion as to where we are, what people need to be able to do at this point is access their thinking mind by being able to make informed decisions. And that kind of leads to the next thing that's going on in the mental health world, is that we're living in a time that there is so much conflicting information. And I can't wait for Dr. Epstein to dispel some of this, but it's like, okay, so help me understand. You have to quarantine for 14 days if you had a contact, but 10 if you're positive. But you can't get on a plane for 14 days. And then how many days do you need to be symptom-free? And does loss of smell count? I mean, and then the CDC says this, our kids' schools say that, LA courts may say this, the listserv says that. Your wine coffee clutch may say this, your other group may say that. It's like, what is right? There's not a lot of consensus of what's going on. And that idea of not knowing what's going on makes people feel like the world is not a safe place. And when people don't feel like they're safe, they get nervous and they make impulsive type of decisions. So one of the things that I recommend to people is really working on our communication. And one is working on where we're getting our information. And many of the studies have talked about how the impact of all of this news that we're constantly getting and trying to digest really becomes overwhelming. And that what we really need to do is spend some time kind of limiting all of the extra stuff and find our reliable sources like Dr. Epstein or CDC website or wherever he's going to tell us to look, and stay informed and kind of pick a lane, pick a place where you find comfort and not sitting there changing ideas, and recognizing that we may have differences between family, between friends, between colleagues on what's right. And a lot of this is a world of unknown. And so what we can do in terms of educating parents and educating people is to obviously try to access the kindness in people. But sometimes, especially in high conflict family situations, it may be hard to access kindness. But what we can access is good communication. And so I leave you with this takeaway of a skill that you can teach your clients, that I use all the time actually when I talk to my ex-husband or when I talk to lawyers. And it is, if you don't know it already, it is called the BIFF technique, BIFF. And it's a way to communicate. And it's really important that, and I'm sure all of you guys are telling your clients right now, communicate, talk these issues out. How do you do that? And we do it through BIFF. And BIFF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So brief is keep it short. Keep it, no long essays to your analysis in life and whatever. Be succinct to what your point is. Be informative. Give the information. If there's someone's asking a question, answer the question. Be straight. It's not about you. You kind of just give what information you need to have. Friendly. I know it's hard sometimes in divorce and family law situations to be friendly, but being friendly, it's not going to be very helpful saying, you jerk, I can't believe you would think about letting our kid go to blah, blah, blah without a mask on or whatever. No, having some sort of communication, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are used to writing these for people, but keeping it in the BIFF format, friendly. It shows self-restraint. And then of course, firm. Stick with your boundaries. Kids love rules and structure, but we love rules and structure. If you're a lawyer, you probably live off of rules and structure. So having really clear, firm boundaries, firm answers, clear answers is going to help the communication. It's going to model how to communicate, and it's going to help people feel safer in a time where people feel really unsafe. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Amira.
All right, thank you very much, Robin. So from here, we're actually going to try to do a poll, and hopefully this will work. So I'm going to ask the bar to do the poll as well as I share it on our screen. So our current question for you is, what is your definition of quarantine? Your options are: don't leave the house for any purpose, even groceries, order in essential items for delivery. Option 2 is that same option as option 1, but you are allowed to leave the house to see immediate family members, for example, for custody transfers. Option 3 is stay home except for grocery store or takeout, which must be done socially distanced and with a mask and gloves. And option 4 is wear a mask, stay 6 feet away from people, and practice good hand washing. So go ahead and submit your answers. Let's see if we're able to get a response there.
We are getting lots of responses. Okay, so the first question is 36% or 17 answers, I guess. The second one, the second option B, is 8% or 4 answers. The third one is 37% or 18 answers and or votes. And the fourth one is 18% or 9 votes.
So clearly we have quite a split even amongst everyone here. So thank you very much. Oh, I hope you can all see that now. It says host is sharing poll results. I can see that. So hopefully you all can see that as well. And right now we are going to pass it over to Dr. Epstein, who is going to give us the actual answers here so that we can know.
All right. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak and to add to this. This is a very interesting discussion, and actually Robin hit a lot on some really, really important information. I think, COVID-19 is there's a lot of fatigue. There's a lot of misinformation or disinformation out there. They have a parallel pandemic with an infodemic, and we have to be aware of that. So I'm going to go through this talk very quickly. I mean, I have 15 minutes to cover a lot of information, but I'm going to give the slides so you can have the information to refer to, the websites and information on there that you can use. And I also think that if you have questions in the future about any information like this, feel free to ask your local physician for assistance because they have some insights. And I know a lot of the pediatricians in the community that I work with are really into this, and they can be a wonderful resource for you. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Okay, so COVID-19. There are the objectives of this talk are to kind of describe it, some of the symptoms, transmission, activity risks, high risk populations, morbidity, mortality, different types of testing and prevention. A lot of information, as I mentioned, so I'll go quickly. COVID-19 is basically part of the coronavirus family, 4 of which are very common and give us the common cold. In the early 2000s, we were dealing with SARS coronavirus, which had the SARS virus or the SARS clinical condition with respiratory syndrome, which had a mortality of about 10%, followed by a decade later with MERS, which originated in the Middle East, and a respiratory virus, which caused a high mortality about 36%. And now we're dealing with this novel coronavirus, COVID-19, which originated at the end of 2019, which was diagnosed as a pandemic in March 11, 2020 by the World Health Organization. So we're dealing with something that we were quite familiar with, as a common cold, but now this is a lot more severe. But the symptoms are wide variety of symptoms. I put this up here because you look at this and it could be anything. It could be the common cold symptoms to a viral gastroenteritis. I've seen people just with loss of taste or smell, or a rash, or almost 40% of people can have actually no symptoms while they're infected. And that's the scary part. So we're reacting to that in a way in the clinics by screening people and really taking precautions for anything that walks through the door. It can be transmitted in various ways, majority through respiratory droplets, which are defined as coughing, sneezing, singing, which create these droplets, which kind of have this range and they tend to fall to the ground. That's where the 6 feet or the 2 meters range comes into play. But there has been some thought that maybe some of these can be airborne, and meaning airborne is that they can float along the air and be in smaller particles and travel a larger distance and exist in a room for quite a long time, and actually maybe as long as 3 hours. Some think we close a room down for 2 hours in the clinic once we have somebody who may be suspicious for COVID-19 symptoms. Also, contaminated surfaces are concerned, but they are very, they're far lower on the concern level. Really, it's more the respiratory transmission. Here is just some diagrams showing the droplets, respiratory droplets kind of falling to the ground, and things that are aerosolized, which can go quite farther because they're smaller. And then some of the recent studies that have shown that it can exist on surfaces, and that's why we clean surfaces after we see patients or there's any concern. But they don't live very long on some of the more common surfaces, so you don't need to worry about your Amazon package really causing too much problems. But good hand washing is a good mitigator of some of these things. So who needs to quarantine after there's been some kind of contact? And there's been some discussion about this. Initially, the CDC said within 6 feet for a total of 15 minutes or more. Initially, it was at one sitting. Now it's accumulative over a 24-hour period, the thought is. But regardless, if you have contact with somebody for 15 minutes or more, or less than 6 feet, that's a concern for close contact. We in the clinic, I have a N95 mask right here. I got my goggles here because it can be transmitted and you can droplets in your eyes. So there's concern for transmission that way. So the thought is that some of these cloth masks may not be overly protective. So even if you have a cloth mask and you're within 6 feet of somebody and for more than 15 minutes that has it, that you should still consider that as direct contact. Other things here, providing home care to somebody who's got COVID, direct physical contact, hugging or kissing, shared eating or using utensils, and then actually getting the respiratory droplets on your face. So what is quarantine and isolation? So quarantine pertains to somebody who's been exposed, but not necessarily has the disease, but there's concern about getting the disease. And then isolation really separates somebody who actually is sick with the disease and really kind of putting them in a room and really limiting their exposure with any outside contact. And when the question with quarantine, it's a very difficult thing to really define exactly because people have different thoughts about it. But the idea is that you want to minimize your contact with any individuals outside. Does that mean that you can't go to the grocery store? If you need to go to the grocery store, take the proper precautions, wear the mask, stay 6 feet away from people so that you're not putting them at risk. But strict isolation means that you have the disease and you don't want to be in contact with anybody, put anybody at risk. Now, when they talk about quarantining, there's the idea that you have to quarantine for 14 days, meaning that the virus incubation period is between 2 and 14 days. And so that's why anywhere along that time, you can develop symptoms and get the disease. So I've seen people get the disease at 10 days after exposure. More commonly, it's around 5 to 8. That's the peak, but we are being on the safe side and waiting until 14 days. Well, what happens if you have continued exposure with somebody at home? Well, that changes things. So if you have the disease, you are theoretically contagious until that 10-day period. The reason being, and I'll explain later, is that, I'll explain now, but at 10 days, after that, if it's mild disease, the thought is that you will continue to test positive for weeks or even up to a couple months afterwards, just with the sensitive tests having the viral particles there, but not actually being infectious or, not viable viral particles. So if you're at home and you have somebody who's got COVID and you've had direct exposure to them, well, you have to, or you're around them, you have to wait till they are finishing their illness at 10 days. And if you don't have it already, you have to wait 14 days. So that's 24 days that you have to really be away from other people. And so there are a number of scenarios they have on the CDC website, and I have the link to those on here. But it's very interesting, and it gets very complicated, especially with the, in the contact tracing realm. So I mentioned here, if you've been sick, you have COVID, at least 10 days from when your symptoms started, assuming you have mild illness, and then no fever for 24 hours, and then you can go out into the world. If you tested positive, had no symptoms, then you have to wait 10 days. If you at some point develop symptoms during that period, then you count from when your symptoms started, so that 10-day point. So I hope that's not too entirely confusing. And then getting tested again, at the end, you don't really require testing, although some schools and businesses are requiring retesting. The problem with that is, I mentioned, that you can test positive for weeks afterwards or even months and not actually be infectious. And so the CDC is not recommending, if you're well and you've completed that 10-day course of illness, or 10 days after your positive test and you're fine, that you don't need to get retested. Activities that are different risk levels. The lowest risks are keeping with your nuclear family, at home, washing your hands, and being safe in that respect. Next level, outdoor activities, not really engaging with people. And next level, higher risk, is outdoor gatherings with other people. And then the highest risk is indoor gatherings with people around you. Mind you, the rule of 6 feet, wearing a mask, washing hands, staying away if you're sick, don't touch your face. Any activities that that break down those barriers put you at higher risk. Outdoors is better because the particles disperse. Indoors, it's more concentrated, and so you have a higher viral load risk. And so you can go down different activities, like the CDC actually had, for Halloween, high risk activities, low risk activities, Thanksgiving, high risk. So you can find those on the CDC website, and they'll talk about the different holidays and give you ideas for things. But these are just the general principles. Travel, it's an issue. If you're traveling in your car and you're by yourself, not a problem. If you're around other people, same principles apply as if you're in indoors. Air travel, there's thought that people saying that it's relatively safe. Well, it is until if you get it, there have been cases of people getting on a plane, they get the test and they get the test back after they've already landed and it was positive. So they've exposed a bunch of different people. Whether they get sick or not, that's another question. I've heard of people getting sick on airplanes. They've had the mask and stuff on, but maybe the respiratory droplets got on their eyes. So the idea is that you wear the goggles, face shield, and mask. Don't take it off for eating. And it's hard to quantify. I can't give you a percentage of who's going to get sick or how safe it is, but it's just the level of risk that you're willing to take. The reason that we're so concerned is that, the higher risk populations for hospitalization are obviously the older population. And so comparing to the 18 to 29 age group, which most of the people that have been getting it have been in the 18 to 40 year age group. That's the highest concentration of people getting it. A lot less in the younger kids, like, the less than 18, it's been about maybe 10%. And then over 65, it's been a lower percentage. But you can see that the hospitalization rate and risk is so much higher as you get older, and the mortality risk is so much higher as you get older. And in point of fact, they say that about 8 of 10 of deaths have been in people 65 years and older. So that's where, personal disclosure, my nephew had his bar mitzvah in Los Angeles, and my parents live in Seattle. They didn't come down. They're in a high risk group. It's something that they would have loved to do, but they just didn't want to take the risk, and which is, the feeling in the older populations. Even some pediatricians aren't seeing patients in person because they're concerned about the risk of contagion. Higher risk populations not only dealing with age, but also risk factors include certain diseases, especially obesity, type 2 diabetes. Things that might be at risk include these things here. Something to think about. But when you look at the mortality rate, it's around 2.3%. And given the fact that influenza is about 0.1%, it is a significant higher number. But there is a skew, and most of the younger people will get a cold. But as you get in the older age groups, that mortality by age goes up, and also the mortality by disease, underlying disease condition goes up. And so you really have to take those into account and mitigate your risk if you are in one of those high risk age groups. The severity of illness, 81% will have maybe mild to moderate symptoms. Some people, as I mentioned, won't have any symptoms. Some will have more severe disease, and there's a small fraction that will have critical illness. But the thing that bothers me about this infodemic, that we see, is that people are saying that, it's not killing that many people. Well, they don't take into account the morbidity, because if you survive and you're on a ventilator for 16 days, or you're in the hospital for 10 days, or you have one of these things where they call the COVID long haulers, who may have chronic illnesses after the disease has finished, that's a significant morbidity, and that's a problem. And that's what frightens a lot of the medical community as well. Some of the testing modalities are the PCR, the antigen test, the antibody test. I won't go too in depth, but the PCR is the most sensitive. The antigen test is usually the rapid test, not as reliable. The antibody test is only testing for if you had it in the past, not if you have it now. The antigen test and the PCR test for now. And because of the the incubation period is 2 to 14 days. This shows you at days after infection when people develop symptoms usually. And the best time to test usually is around a week after exposure. You don't want to go to the doctor and get tested the day after you were exposed, because the chances of you having a negative test are really high, and they call it a false negative, because you may feel like you don't have COVID because of the test result, but you actually may have it and you may get it at day 10. So it's something to keep in mind. Testing timing is important. And this is a little cartoon which gets this to point that if you test on Monday and you don't get the results back until 5 days later, and you have all these activities in between, you may have been exposed. And so the timing of the testing is important, and also when you get the test back is important. So getting them back rapidly is important. Now, stopping the spread, there's no one thing that is a silver bullet for COVID-19, but with all they call the Swiss cheese model, if you do all these things, eventually you're going to get to a point where it's going to block the spread. So washing hands, wearing masks, social distancing, avoid large indoor gatherings are important to mitigate the risk. Not 100%, but it lowers it significantly. And wearing a mask, not for yourself, but for other people. That's what we say, we wear your mask for others. So wearing a mask reduces contagion. Don't use a valve mask, because the valve mask will protect you, but if you have COVID, it will spread it to everybody else because particles will leak out of the valve. In conclusion, COVID is very contagious, and the best way to treat COVID-19 is not to get it in the first place. And really speaking to what Robin mentioned too, you have to mitigate the risks based on your family risk tolerance. And the pandemic is still present, and so is the infodemic. Here are some websites that have some good information, reliable information. If you have any questions, ask your local physician or somebody you feel comfortable asking. And that's all I got.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go into our scenarios. So we're going to look at a few potential scenarios that you are likely to see. So I'm going to read them and then ask our panelists to discuss. So the first scenario is mom and dad are going through a relatively amicable divorce, and they have pendente lite orders for joint legal and physical custody. Mom and dad have agreed to go on a trip with daughter to Austin, Texas to celebrate grandma's 95th birthday, which will be combined with Christmas, where about 20 extended family members are expected to gather. And mom, dad, and daughter will fly from Los Angeles to Texas together, but stay in separate quarters while they're there. Mom and dad will alternate custodial time with daughter, and they've agreed that they will all be very cautious, especially leading up to grandma's party, to avoid endangering grandma. So while in Austin, 2 days before grandma's party, dad finds out that mom and daughter went out to dinner at an outdoor restaurant, had outdoor manicures with masks on, except when they were sipping their lattes, and played golf outdoors without masks. All of these activities, by the way, are in compliance with whatever the local Austin COVID laws were at the moment. And grandma's birthday party technically fell on dad's custody day, but he said there was no way they should attend, and he wouldn't spend time with daughter during the break until after she had self-quarantined for at least 14 days. Daughter was devastated to miss grandma's birthday and felt very hurt by dad's refusal to see her. And after they returned to LA, mom filed for modification of custody, arguing that dad was not child-centered. So from here, we're going to ask for a poll. What do you all think is the single most important factor in evaluating how risky an activity is with respect to COVID transmission risk? And your options are masks, staying indoors versus being outdoors, social distancing, or the number of people who you're around. And while people are voting, I'm going to let Dr. Epstein take the first shot at this one, and then we'll go from there.
I was looking for E, all of the above.
Right.
We purposefully did not put that on there because we knew everyone would say that.
Yeah, that's a good one. They all play such an important part of transmission. But if I had to choose one, I would say masks for me is important. But realizing that all of these are important. I mean, I wouldn't be around people. I would be social distancing. I would be outdoors, and I'd be wearing a mask if I was around crowds. But that's a tough question. So.
So I'm going to ask our panelists to look back at this full scenario and tell us what you would recommend to your client, whether your client is mom or dad, how you would sort of try to address the issues that we're seeing here, which are many.
What I find ironic about this hypothetical is that dad, who's taking a pretty hard line stand, not necessarily an unjustified one, but who's taking a very hard line stand, was okay with getting on a plane and was okay with the idea of going to a party. So it seems somewhat arbitrary in terms of the lines that he's drawn here. But the bigger issue is you have a child who is feeling hurt by dad's decision, and a parent who's now trying to modify custody. This hypothetical doesn't say what the current custody orders are. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it does. But as a practitioner, I would look at the situation and think back to what we've heard all of our judicial officers say about addressing custody disputes during COVID, which is that we really need to, as practitioners, be as creative as we can and encourage our clients to look at alternative means of resolving their disputes beyond just running to court, which we all came to fall back on during pre-COVID times. This scenario seems like it would be ripe for some family therapy between dad and daughter, maybe some co-parenting therapy between the parents. This would be a good time for the parents to model empathy, flexibility, all of those qualities for their daughter. It would be a great teachable moment in terms of explaining to the daughter how different people have different views of what it means to be careful. And when Robin talked at the beginning of this webinar about the BIF method and the importance of having firm boundaries, I agree that that's really useful. But we're also encouraging during COVID this type of flexibility, and then we're seeing the result of that flexibility, which is a family that really did not understand where the boundaries were in terms of their agreement to be safe. So I don't think this is a situation that should end up in court. I think this is a situation that is better addressed through mental health professionals. And as lawyers, I think it's our job to guide the parties towards that type of resolution rather than running to court.
And Shani, I just want to address the dialectical thinking of flexible but firm. When I was talking about firm boundaries, it's not necessarily firm boundaries and not being reasonable and flexible and coming up with a decision. It's the idea that once a decision has been made, to stick within the boundaries of what decisions are, because where confusion happens is when then all of a sudden one day it's okay to have a party with these people, but it's not okay to go to those people. And that's where things get confusing. And so when I'm talking about like being firm, once a decision has been made in terms of what we're telling our children, sticking to that is going to be really important.
Yeah, and I think this is an area where a lot of co-parents are getting into trouble. I think it's an area where a lot of couples in intact relationships are having disputes. Even within this group, when we polled everyone to ask what everyone thought, quarantine meant, there was no consensus there. So to the extent that somebody within this potential dispute feels that they have a bright line that they will draw, it would probably be a good idea to have a conversation with the relevant players in that scenario, explaining where your bright line is, and maybe even seeking the expertise of somebody like David or your medical practitioner who you trust to help you better define where those lines should rationally be. Because assuming we can't all lead a 100% risk-free life, we need to choose which risks are acceptable, and different people value different things and are going to choose different risks that they're willing to take.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Cohen, did you want to add anything before we move on to the next scenario?
No, I thought that was really well spoken. I think the reality for everybody is to follow what Dr. Epstein is saying. I mean, these are issues people are having in and out of family law court. But I do appreciate the comments here to try to guide to resolution in a scenario such as this, outside of court first before coming to court for something like this. So thank you for the thoughtful answers.
Before we move to the next scenario, does everyone see the sharing poll results? Okay, so I can read them just in case if someone doesn't see them. So the question was, what is the single most important factor in evaluating how risky an activity is with respect to COVID transmission risk? So the first question, masks, 40% vote. Second, indoors, outdoors, 10% vote. Third one, social distancing, 15% vote. And the fourth one, number of people, 35% vote.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to go on to our next scenario and poll question. So next scenario is Nick is age 9 and at a Los Angeles school. His school has been entirely online and his mom and therapist have noticed a decline in his mental health. The therapist suggested play dates, outdoor, COVID-friendly, socially distanced play dates. Mom agreed to such play dates and does not consult dad. And Nick has had about 8 of these play dates. And dad never knows about them and keeps his regular visitation schedule. Nick has a sleepover after one play date because mom, along with the other parents, decided that their pod was small enough. Dad learns about the play date when Nick comes over for a regular custody exchange, and he's so angry about these play dates happening without his knowledge that he shouts at mom and punches a wall. So our poll question for this is, which statement do you agree with the most? And your options are A, it was good that mom didn't tell dad in advance. B, dad should go for ex parte for full custody. C, mom should request a DVRO. And D, Nick needs minors counsel. So we'll give it a couple of seconds.
And we are voting. The polling is on. So let's wait around a minute for the results.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at those results.
Okay, so the question was, which statement do you agree with the most? The first, it was good that mom didn't tell dad in advance, 5% votes. Second, dad should go for ex parte for full custody, 10% votes. Third one, mom should request a DVRO, 20% votes. And the fourth one, Nick needs minor counsel, 65% votes.
All right, what do our panelists think?
I abstained. I don't like any of the choices.
That's what I did too.
So I think in this scenario, there are a lot of things that aren't black and white. I think that mom's decision to let Nick have some outdoor play dates at the suggestion of his therapist was a child-centered decision, and that aspect of her conduct was probably good parenting, relatively low risk in terms of COVID transmission because they're outdoors, they're social distancing. What maybe isn't such good parenting or not best practices in terms of co-parenting is not sharing this information with dad. We don't know what type of custody orders, if any, they have, and even assuming they have joint custody, different joint custody orders require different types of information sharing. But given the state of our world today, it's certainly the type of information that a parent could reasonably expect the other parent to want. And in terms of not sharing the information and in terms of putting dad at risk in that way, is mom violating the principles of the friendly parent doctrine? I mean, it doesn't quite fall within those parameters, but it's not showing a great deal of respect for for dad's relationship with the child and dad's health. And then I think the other question that gets invoked by this scenario, obviously, is when dad learns about the play date and punches the wall and yells, is this a DV situation? And I'm sure other people on the panel can speak to this in more detail than I will, but there are different levels of DV. You look at you look at patterns of violence and of behavior that falls under a coercive control umbrella. My inclination would be to look at the situation, get further context. Does dad have a history of abuse? If this is a historically abusive party who shouts and punches a wall, I think the analysis is really different. If this is a parent who's otherwise fairly gentle and calm and who was who made a bad decision under a very stressful circumstance. And you know, obviously, if one party does decide to pursue a domestic violence restraining order, Family Code Section 3044 would be invoked. That provides that there's a rebuttable presumption that if there's been a finding of domestic violence within the previous 5 years, that joint custody would be detrimental to the child's best interest. However, it is a rebuttable presumption. And again, looking at the context, if this is a dad who has a huge temper, who this child has seen shout and have anger management problems many times, that's one thing. And if this is an isolated incident, maybe it's something else. And the one other thing I would raise is that Family Code Section 3020C requires a court, when making a custody order, to take the health and safety of all family members into consideration. And in this scenario number 2, mom really did not take dad's health into consideration, but I think everyone's first concern is Nick. Anyway, I think I'm going to turn this over to Robin and Commissioner Cohen.
I'm going to let Commissioner Cohen weigh in here as our DVTRO commissioner.
Sure. I mean, I would just be looking for all of you to advocate on behalf of your clients so I could have all of the facts, because obviously what we've done with these scenarios is gave it somewhat limited. And so I'm watching some of the chat and people aren't liking some of the fact patterns here, and that's helpful. I mean, I would just want to see a complete declaration as to exactly what really is going on in the courtroom. I would want, if you are filing a DVRO, I would want to hear from both sides as to what's going on. So as you indicated, is there a history of violence? Was this a one-time incident? Was the anger because one party felt that they were not being given all of the information that they should be? Were the parents not really co-parenting? You know, there's so many other facts that I would want to see in order to really have this in a hearing before me. Depending also on what one puts in the DV-100 petition, if somebody actually opted to file that, you know, you would have to have enough information, because otherwise it may, if it was limited, you know, there may be not a temporary restraining order issued. It may just look like a custody dispute, and then they would just wait for the hearing. So it really depends on the facts that are shared for any kind of ruling.
Great, thank you very much. And I think that's a perfect segue into our final topic of the evening, which is going to be Commissioner Cohen's advice on how to make your judicial officer happy and get your granted restraining order quickly. I think the one question that we had asked that you also consider discussing with us this evening is if the perspective of the court has changed with respect to domestic violence over the course of COVID. That's something that maybe previously didn't rise to the level of something worthy of a restraining order now does, or vice versa, that's something that used to maybe wouldn't at this point.
Sure. So thank you to everybody for inviting me here today. I think the first couple things I just want to give are some basics as to what's going on right now. So as we all know, COVID is much riskier right now than it's been. The numbers are up, and Dr. Epstein was very helpful in sharing what's going on right now. I think there's a lot of news going on right now that there are DV numbers that are up. I haven't seen specific numbers for LA Superior Court as to whether we have additional filings, but I have heard, just like everybody else, that the news themselves are saying that there's higher criminal prosecution, higher reporting, and not only just for DV, but for child abuse as well. So those numbers are up. Anecdotally, when we first shut down in March, and only were having the restraining orders and ex partes and other emergency hearings, in the very beginning, I was worried because there were hardly any filings. But then the word did get out. A lot of the legal service organizations were very active and proactive to make sure that the community knew that the courts were open for restraining orders. And so they did slowly come back. And as far as I can tell, personally and anecdotally, just based on having a department only that handles restraining orders, I feel like we're back to our pre-COVID numbers and managing a calendar similar to what it was before. I'm personally not seeing what you would think are very specific COVID-related in DV. I do see them a lot in civil harassment. I see a lot of people filing against their neighbors for being close to them, for not wearing a mask, for coughing on them and things like that. But I've not seen as many specific for DV. I do want to say about the courts themselves, I see most of you virtually, but I do see a lot of attorneys and a lot of self-represented litigants do come into our court each and every day. We are doing the best we can to keep everybody safe. We have lots of signage. We have green dots to keep everyone separate and social distance in the chairs. Everyone is wearing a mask. I've yet to have anybody give me a difficulty in wearing a mask. I do have to remind everybody to pull it up a lot. I do a lot of touching my nose to make sure people know that it actually has to cover your nose. We have plexiglass separators. So I think if you feel that you have to go to court, or if you feel that you have to be there, I mean, I'm there every day, but I do feel fairly safe, even though I've been there nonstop since March. So I do want to let you know that we're doing our best to keep everybody safe there in the courthouse. I also want to say a huge thank you to Judges Riff, Brazil, Taylor, and Kaufman. We now have 3 dedicated restraining order courts. I think it's helpful for the home courts to not have some of the civil harassment restraining orders clogging their dockets. And so I am the one that hears them along with the other 2 new judicial officers. So we hear not just DVs though, I hear civil harassments, elder abuse, gun violence, and school violence, and workplace violence. So I think people would think that the majority of my caseload is DV, but it's actually not. One of the reasons is because if there is a home court, if I find out that there is a dissolution or a parentage case, then I do, under the local rules, I am relating those cases so the home courts can hear those DV cases. And on occasion, I may relate a CH if it is an X or another X that might intersect with them all. And I see somebody just said, who are the other courtrooms? So I'm in Department 94. We also have Judge Warren and Judge Arian, and they are in Department 25 and Department 13. Judge Spear has relocated. So we are the 3 only dedicated restraining order departments in Stanley Mosque at this time. There are court changes that everyone's been aware of, I think, since COVID that are helpful, and they're especially helpful for the DV and the restraining order cases, is that there are new ways to file. So everyone knows that there's fax filing, you can drop off, so you don't only just have to come to court. We are being as efficient as we can if you are appearing through LA Court Connect to get those documents back out to you. My JA is really good in getting them out that day. So if you are appearing and you need a continuance form, we're emailing them back to you. So I believe that's working, and that's kind of a new way to communicate with everybody. So that is a benefit of some changes that are coming from this horrific pandemic. We also are using LA Court Connect. I do have a lot of people using it each and every day, both video and telephone. And as everybody is aware, there are glitches. So just a couple reminder, know that there is a telephone number for backup. So if you or your client or a witness is having bandwidth issues, we can have them just see us still, but then we can mute you, and then they could use the phone, and that works very well as a backup. Also have plan for your evidence. So make sure you talk to counsel on the other side and know how you're going to share things. I have in with self-represented litigants, but clearly with attorneys too, I have people, holding their phones up. And, it's not ideal, but I'm trying the best I can to allow everybody to be safe and the opportunity to be heard. And then just most importantly, please know that you need separate squares. So you need to register for yourself and your client and your witnesses all separately. It's not just for me, I could tell who's speaking, but it's really for the court reporter. The court reporter needs to know who is speaking. And if you're sharing a screen, that's not okay. We also need to make sure that witnesses understand the same privacy rights that you would have as if you were in court. So they will be muted and on hold, so they're not hearing things and then brought back in. So we are doing the best we can with some of that technological challenges, but just have patience with us and know that I'm not an IT person, so if there's problems, it's happening court-wide. I can do the best I can in my department to keep it going, but try to figure some of those bandwidth issues out yourself. And then another positive outcome is we are having staggered calendars. So I have an 8:30, a 10:30, and a 1:30 calendar. So it should be helpful to you so you don't sit around and wait all day long anymore. And I think a couple other things I would just want to say is just be clear on your DV forms. If you are filing a DV and that's what you choose to file, if you did that after you tried to de-escalate maybe the situation, decided whether you're going to file an RFO or an ex parte, and you really do choose to file that DV, just file the paperwork with an attached declaration that's clear as to what you're asking for. Make sure the boxes are all checked so you know what I'm seeing, and then review the forms that you get back. So clearly look at the 110s when you get them back so you know what was actually granted, and the 109 so you're clear to see if it was partly granted, all the way granted, and you know where and when to come to court. And if you have any continuance requests, we in my department definitely follow statutory guidelines. If there is a waiver of time, then we can go beyond that statutory time period. If you are asking as a respondent for your first time request, that is obviously going to be granted under the statute. It is helpful if you do file a 120 with a declaration. We are trying to be as efficient as we can with these hearings if possible, but of course it's not required. I am asking if there are counsel to meet and confer still. It's very helpful if you can help resolve some issues, especially sitting with custody issues here today. So the focus of the restraining order is the restraining order, and it's not really a contested custody matter. And then my final request really is just to have patience, be respectful with each other, be understanding. These are very challenging times, as everybody's talked about here today. People are anxious. They're anxious to be in court. They're anxious for the world around us. And we really are doing the best we can in these unique times to allow everyone to be heard, to have these cases go forward as efficiently as they can. I have continued cases. I'm finding good cause to continue them. If somebody says that they've been exposed to COVID, I'm going to continue the case. If LA Court Connect's not working that day, and I know people are frustrated, I can't wave a magic wand and make it work. So I am continuing things. So just try to have patience with each other and with the court and with your parties on both sides. And thank you again, and stay safe, and happy holidays. And I look forward to seeing everybody in person as soon as we're able to.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you. I'll thank all of our speakers, Dr. Epstein, Commissioner Cohen, Robin Sachs, and Shani Braffman-Aman. We have had a lot of information here. I think we're all going to think a lot more about defining what we mean and communicating clearly. And I want to thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you again so much.